This bee balm is literally crawling with bees. Wow.
I just thought, a pink onion, why not try it?
Our hostas do well in Minnesota. They like our temperatures.
We have things blooming from early spring to late fall.
It's fun to imagine what this place will be like in a few years. We've just gotten started.
Thanks for joining us on Great Gardening. I'm your host, Natalie Hest. I will be filling in for Sharon Young this evening, and she will be back next week. Tonight, we'll be talking about amendments. Our garden experts will have advice to share about mulches, fertilizers, and more. Let's welcome back our garden experts. They are horticulturist and educator Bob Olin and garden professional Deb Burns-Erickson of Burns Greenhouse in Zim. We want to hear from gardeners across our region who have questions for our experts. We have phone volunteers from the St. Louis County Master Gardeners to receive your questions this evening. Call locally at 218-788-2847 or email us at ask@pbsnorth.org. We have first look at some signs of spring.
What's that?
Oh, that's my favorite. There's our pussy willows that are out there in their magnificent glory right now. And just spend a little time. Those are beautiful blooms. And this is our maples. They took a little while to pop, but they're out there just right now. And that's the flower of the sugar maple in this particular case.
Well, let's start off with a garden tour. In 2023, we visited the gardens of Susan Darley Hill. She lives on the hill in Duluth and values natural plants. She'll show us how she keeps her neighborhood space friendly for wildlife.
I'm Susie Darley Hill, and you are at our East Hillside home in Duluth. We've lived in Duluth at this particular spot for 22 years. We were so happy to find this spot on the hillside with lovely trees, a little view of the lake. We could hear the foghorn from our house, and that sort of clinched it for us. It's challenging to grow some of the things that we would like to grow. So we don't have a lot of colorful flowers in the front yard. We have a ton of hostas. We are big into native gardening as well. And so finding the right kind of natives to grow in the shade is important to us. We are fortunate to live on a double lot. And so that's allowed us to do some interesting things. Always reducing lawn has been our focus. When we lived in Texas, we had a big native space, about half an acre of native wildflowers. Always getting rid of lawn, but having just enough for the grandkids to play in and to get from one place to another. We love to be outdoors. We built this deck onto the front of the house and had them bump it out so we could still see the lake. But we built it around a big box elder tree that was actually smaller than when we first put in the deck, and we've had to expand the hole through which it grows. But we've gotten sap to make syrup from this wonderful tree. It's magnificent shade. This is our sunny part of the yard, and so we got some apple trees, we have a couple of cherries. We had fencing around this with lots of blueberries, some flowers, an original peony that's in there. And we're kind of transitioning. We took the fence down and we still have blueberries in here. We have honeyberries that we've added. We also used to grow a ton of hops, which grew up all the way up to the top, like 3 stories up. And that was really fun to hang out underneath the curtain of hops. Hops attracts aphids, which means that you can have a very sticky deck. And so we finally decided we're gonna curtail the hops crop and just grow it up to that first level. We love our neighborhood. People stop and walk through it, and it's just, we try to make a very inviting space, both for humans and for the wildlife.
Thanks, Susan. Later tonight, we'll visit a free public greenhouse in Virginia, Minnesota. But for now, let's get to some questions. So we have a question from Rose in Cloquet, and she said, is now a good time to trim or prune our grapevines?
Absolutely. This would be the time, and most of our native grapes, you can prune them pretty hard. The Valiants of the world and the Bluebell, Beta, those are the big 3 that we've got that are native, all part of our crosses with our native grapes, so they can be pruned back pretty hard right now this time of year.
Wonderful. So Bernadette in South Range, Wisconsin asks for some suggestions when changing a south-facing lawn to a seeded flower garden.
Seeded flower garden. Well, that's kind of a challenge. I mean, because of germination and your seed selection. You might want to start some of the seeds indoors and just get a start up on things. You can do it and seed your bed and do some mulch and hope for good germination. But a lot of times if you're specific in the seeds you're buying rather than a mix like a bee mix or a wildflower mix, be real specific in the varieties that you pick and get ones that we are truly perennial for us. And then start some indoors so that you have them. And then you can also do a nice big bed with a good mulch.
Yeah, this time of year in spring, I would agree. If she wants perennials, a lot of perennials really, you have to break that dormancy of the seed, and that takes takes a cold shock treatment.
Stratification, yeah.
Right, you got to stratify them. That's what nature does. So she might want to put some plants in, some transplants, with the idea of seeding coming into the fall with a little covering, so that she can establish the rest of that, to fill it in with from seed for the perennial seed.
Or she could stratify them in the freezer too if she wanted.
Or refrigerator, That's 60 days minimum with higher humidities, and then you'll be planting outside and getting them started and established.
In the middle
We're
of
well,
summer,
we're
which
well
is
into
tougher.
the season at that time.
So we've got another spring trimming question from Barb in South Superior, and she asks, should we trim our clematis to the ground in the spring? They have one that has beautiful blooms and a great volume.
Well, it depends on which clematis it is,
That's
because
right
there's two
again.
varieties. There's a 2 and a 3, and which one you have makes a difference on when you should trim it.
That's right. So she doesn't want to prune off anything that's
Might be green.
viable and green at this point. And clematis,
Right.
it's real interesting because you get the right site and they're spectacular.
Oh, they are.
But you got to have cooler roots, so this is where mulches might come in, which we're going to
Right.
discuss a little bit to keep the roots cool, and then bright but cool sunlight on the green portion of the plant.
And a lot of times I think people struggle with a clematis because they plant it inside their drip line.
Yeah.
And if it's inside the drip line, it's really dry.
Yeah.
And clematis really do like a good amount of moisture, and you can lose it just by being inside and by poor soil composition that's in that drip line, because a lot of times it isn't really very good.
And then start with a real hardy variety, Jackmania.
Jackmania.
Yeah,
Sure.
you can grow that one.
Well, thank you to our viewers for your questions. Deb, you wanted to talk about fertilizer.
Well, right. Okay, so just a little, what we do a lot of containers, we do a lot of growing that way. And so starting your container with different components, like we start with a peat, and ours is a reed canary peat that we have right on the farm. So we have a good amount of that for our containers. Then we'll add perlite to it, just to lighten it up, because it can get quite dense. And again, we'll get the good roots in there and get some pockets for the air and pockets for water. And we also add a little sphagnum moss to it to lighten it again, just because you really want to keep it kind of light. And we will also then, so this is kind of the composition that you get, is like this. And then we will use Osmocote or Multicoat. There's different brand names now for a time-released, slow-released prill. It's a prill, and it has little pores that open up at 70 degrees when plants really need and can use more fertilizer. And so we'll put like a tablespoon at least on a good size, well, like a 10-inch container on the first of the month, every month. And then you don't have to mix your water solubles. You can just top dress it and then really forget about it. And it's just really nice and easy compared to a water soluble.
So it's nice. Since you got the samples here, why don't you bring the peat up and let's show folks. People always ask the question. This is the peat moss, which is partially decomposed sphagnum. Peat is much farther down the bog, and it's been decomposing for a much longer period of time. This is what people in this area will call black dirt. It's really not black dirt. It is peat that came farther down the bog, started here, then after a long period of time it decomposed into peat. So peat moss, peat.
So thanks so much, Deb. We're going to get back to more questions, and I actually have one a little bit about fertilizer. So Richard from Hermantown has 8 4x12 raised beds and wants to know how much manure or compost he should add to each to fertilize.
How much to add,
Depends on what he has in there already and what is his foundation that he has. Does he have good peat? Does he have mineral soils. What does he have? That will really make a difference on what his top should be.
Right, and we really would like to get maybe as much as 15% organic. Just be a little careful with manures. Animal manures really should be completely decomposed, at least a year old as a minimum, but not more than about 10%. The rest should be about 10 to 15%.
And then on vegetables, they should really watch when they're putting that manure. I would top dress over the manure with compost, because some of that splash up, I mean, I'm sure if it's well broken down, but there can be cross-contamination, and you could have something in that animal waste.
You want to be careful, and it should be a minimum of a year old.
Sure. So we have another question from Lisa, and she says that in her yard she has a lot of clay soil. So she brought her perennials over. She put them on one side of the house, and now she wants to move them. Is it safe to move her perennials? Will they grow? Will they still flower?
Oh, sure.
Right, yeah.
And right now, the
It's a good time.
earlier you can do it, and this year we don't have any frost in the ground, so move them
Right.
right now. You should be off to a good start. Clays are a challenge a little bit. We can add some organics. You don't want to add sand to clay, because sometimes you get a hard pan that results, but you can certainly add organics, and that's a good time to do it, mixing it in with the clay, and then moving them as soon as you can right now.
And the more you mix and amend, the better it's going to be long term.
But it's mixing. We want to dig a hole and fill it with an organic, a peat or something, and then those roots will get out and get in circles. So you really want a mixture occurring if you're going to add any organic to the clay.
Sure. We have some folks who are planting their gardens this summer. So we have someone from Duluth who asks, they're planning for a pollinator garden. What plants would you recommend that they include?
Oh, wow.
Oh, there's so many. But you know what's great? Okay, just think of flower structure really to begin with, and time of year when it blooms. So you really need something that's open, that the bees can get the pollen, get the nectar straight out. And then you need something that's going to bring color in the spring, because a lot of times there's not nearly enough pollen in the spring and nectar. And so spring, summer, fall, and then there's a dearth in the middle where there is a lack of natives that are blooming. And that's kind of right before the fall starts and right after the summer is done, there's a lull. So if you have something that's a later early fall blooming or late summer blooming, really helps to fill that gap. But it's really on flower structure and then color. And of course, if you do more natives, and in big clumps, large clumps, so the bees know to come and go from that area, and they can tell the other bees, whether it's honeybee or native bees, they can communicate to go back to the same one.
And this is where really some of the hybrids are so vibrant, but they might not have complete flowers. So this is where going to the heirlooms and getting as much native material in their big blocks of different kinds of color throughout the season.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have some questions that are coming in about different funguses. We had one question that asked, what is the best way to eliminate fungus gnats in houseplants?
Totally different.
Fun.
Yeah.
Right. Well, okay, so in my opinion is letting them run dry as you can get them to run, and not going to wilt, because the fungus gnats need to lay their eggs in the soil. The soil needs to be moist in order for the larvae to hatch and then to become the fungus gnats. Right. Some people say about putting like a layer of a layer of sand or something that'll keep it dry on the top where they can't lay the eggs.
Now, fungus gnat, they're down in the soil, and oftentimes it's springtail that they're concerned about, or columbella. So if they're jumping around, that's not fungus gnat, but everyone calls them that. And then you have an issue. If you can't get it under control with these techniques, then sometimes an over-the-counter chemical pesticide outdoors where it's labeled one quick treatment, and you've got both of those. Yeah, knock them down. You've got both fungus gnat and springtail under control.
So you got this is real fungus this time. So there's white stuff that is developed on Glory's grapevines. She thinks it's maybe a fungus. It develops on the leaves and the grapes. What should she apply and when?
So powdery mildew.
Powdery mildew.
Right. And that's a humidity and moisture issue.
It's kind of a benign fungus. It's not going to go systemic, not going to kill the grapevine, but it does impact it. I would say pruning back, sometimes.
Airing it out.
Airing it out, opening it up, pruning it back. We really don't have a recommended fungicide for control or treatment there.
So this next question comes from Carla and Evelith, and this is about onions. She says, how do you grow large onions? She's currently using candy onions, but they never grow larger than a ping pong ball.
Oh, interesting.
So
The big key really, and she got a good variety there. That's an intermediate day onion, and it's a little bit more limited in size. I'll say that because it is an intermediate day. She wants a long day onion. Try a yellow sweet Spanish. Would be a good choice, or for a keeper, Patterson's a beautiful onion. Start from the transplants, which you can buy at local greenhouses, and then start early, May 1, and then make sure you give them every opportunity. They're shallow rooted, so you want to make sure that you get all the moisture they need. They don't compete well with weeds, so keep the weeds down, and then just let them grow out, and some fertility early. They'll take nitrogen early, but early, the right varieties. I'd say Sweet Spanish, Eliza Craig, there are any number. Walla Walla is another real good one. The Walla Walla is going to give you a beautiful large bulb, and they're very nice and sweet, and they keep reasonably well.
Thank you. Well, we'll get back to more questions in just a moment. But right now we have another garden tour. In Virginia, Minnesota, the Alcott Greenhouse is a public community space for folks looking for a beautiful, calming space in the Northland. Let's take a look.
This is really a gem for the northern area. So the building and property is owned by the city of Virginia, but we as the nonprofit manage and maintain all of the plants. We're strictly volunteers. We just have a wide variety of plants. A lot of succulents, we have cacti, and by the way, we do have a little pond that has some koi and some fantail goldfish in as well. Bird of Paradise behind me has been around for years. Some of them are reaching all the way to the ceiling. During the winter, we're not open Monday through Friday. That's just in the summertime, from Memorial Weekend until Labor Weekend. Oh, it's gorgeous in here. Anybody can come in and just bring a book if you wanna, bring a lunch. Just come with friends and just come in and relax and enjoy it.
Well, let's get to Bob, who wants to talk mulch and amendments.
First, I want to congratulate you on that last footage. The Alcott in Virginia is a beautiful facility, so thanks for all the volunteers that are doing that good work up there. Yeah, we'll talk just a little bit about mulches, and basically, just terminology. A mulch is something we're putting on top of the soil. Deb talked about amendments. That's something that we're going to incorporate into the soil. So a mulch, we really don't want it to break down, so perfect examples of mulches are pine needles, wood chips. You can use compost. Obviously, we've got an abundance of pine needles, and they don't break down real readily because they're all cellulose, straight carbon, but they make a great mulch because you really don't want them to break down. Wood chips are the same way, and these are available from so many of our folks that are pruning trees, trimming trees. They'll be happy to drop a load of these off. Both of these real woody mulches are going to be fine up on the surface, and what they're going to do, control weeds. They're going to conserve moisture, which could be real critical. We've been dry the last couple of years, and they're very valuable, so you don't want them to break down too fast, but they gradually do get incorporated. When they're down in the soil, then they become a mulch. You may want to add a little additional nitrogen to facilitate the breakdown of these. You can also use compost as a mulch on the surface, and then it can also be incorporated when it becomes an amendment, same product. Nice compost, and people ask about leaf molds. Leaf mold is just basically a compost that the feedstock was leaves, which makes sense where compost can come from any number of sources. But on the surface, the other thing that we may touch on a little bit is a lot of polyfilms are being used. Once again, this is a mulch because it's going on the surface for different purposes. Your black mulches add a little bit of heat to the soil, but for the most part they're on there to conserve moisture as well as to control weeds. Clear polys will heat the soil, but you got to be a little bit careful there because they can get too hot too fast. And a lot of weeds can grow underneath there as well. Yeah. So when we take a look now, we're talking about some amendments, and Deb did touch on that. Everything that you're going to work in her case, with her mixes in the greenhouse, into the peat, so that's fertility. You're going to manage your pH. You can add elemental sulfur if you need to drop the pH. If you need to increase the pH, you can add lime, or there you could use wood ash as an amendment. Perlite opens up the soil. Vermiculite opens it and also holds some moisture. And then also in terms of amendments, we've got a group of beneficial fungi. Now we talked about powdery mildew, a disease pathogenic fungi, but we've got some beneficials, and in particular mycorrhizae, which is being used as an amendment to a lot of mixes, and they can be added to the soil as well. You want to tell them a little bit about mycorrhizae?
And it's great. We've used it for 10 to 12, almost 15 years, and we actually mix it with corn gluten meal so we can see our application. We apply it to the top. We've used it a lot as a symbiotic with the roots of petunias, calibrachoas, and petcoas, because a lot of times when you fertilize them to get good root development, it'll raise the pH, and then they can't get the iron that they need. Well, mycorrhizum has iron in it. Generally, a lot of the mixes do, and so then it protects the roots, it makes the roots stronger, and you won't get a pythium disease, because the pythium, it's just like the root will just strip apart, and mycorrhizum can go inside the root and protect it on the outside. And so it's a great thing if you're concerned with your petunias, and if you have an issue with them not really kind of being weak and not having really good roots on them, mycorrhizum will be great for that.
Yeah, and they're really a natural beneficial. They came from a lot of the woody areas, and they really interact with the roots, and they facilitate the transfer of nutrient to the root system. So they are definitely a beneficial fungi. So why are we amending the soil in the first place? Well, first off, and people don't think too much about this, we're changing either the physical or the chemical composition to enhance growth, make it easier for those roots to pull up the nutrient and to expand. You know, just a real diagram of what a good soil looks like, where you've got these open pockets and pores and the green roots working their way through. So we really don't want a solid mass. We've got some heavy clays, soils in many areas. So you really amend the soil. You add organics to open it up and give you the porosity so the roots can expand, and so that we can pick up the moisture and the nutrition that's all coming through that with that moisture, and the roots are much more effective when we open the soils up. So that's why we're adding the amendments.
Well, let's wrap things up with a couple more questions, if that works for you guys. We've got Judy from Superior, and she wonders if a spray grow micronutrients that are advertised in catalogs, are they actually effective?
My opinion is it's marketing. It's great marketing. The leaves do not transfer nearly as much as the soil does. And really, learning what your issue is really more important than just buying something and then treating it and hoping it goes away. Again, back to soil tests and back to other information. Yeah. But other than a rooted cutting, and if they have no roots and absorbing it through the leaves, yes, there's some transfer there, but not a whole lot compared to the roots.
That's right. About 95% of all your nutrition is going to come up through the root system, get the nutrients down in the soil. In some cases, and I think of strawberry production in particular, where we have taken a tissue sample and we've got a nutrient deficiency and we're halfway through the growing season, you need a quick soluble application. Their foliar feeds can be effective and can be used for dropping in calcium and some of these real specific trace nutrients. But I think for the homeowner, let's stay away from some of those things. Let's soil test, let's get the nutrients down in the soil, and that's where the plant's going to pick most of this up.
So this next question is from Robin in Wisconsin, and this sort of goes to the idea of mulch. She asks, when planting carrots in raised beds, does it help to cover the seeds with a board until they germinate?
There's an old school idea that has some basis, because it's the board that's holding the moisture in. Mm-hmm. However, we want some light to facilitate germination. So the thing about carrots, first they'll germinate at cooler soil temperatures. But the germination is much faster. At cooler temperatures, it might take 2 weeks to germinate that soil. It can take 2 or 3 days for that seed to germinate when soil temperatures are warmer. So a board is just there to hold in the moisture. You can spread a little peat on the top. You can water daily, but you got that seed in 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch. That can dry down very quickly. So you want to be sure, and you want to be very careful, even with a poly. You can put a poly in that'll hold the moisture. Right. But that gets very hot, and in 2 to 3 days, that seed may germinate, and you may burn it off.
Get it off.
So if you're going to cover, you want to cover with just a black poly. But the whole idea is keeping it moist, so that
especially carrots. Yeah.
Carrots are fussy to germinate, and part of it is they'll break, and then they'll dry off, and then they never really do emerge. So you have to keep a steady flow of moisture. That's one thing that the board was doing, but we got better materials to cover with for sure.
Okay. So I think that we have maybe one more question. So when is it safe to plant radish seeds in a raised bed?
Safe right now. Right now, radish will germinate at 40 degrees, and we've got, 2 days ago we had 36 degrees in the soil I was managing, so we're really right there right now. But once again, it takes longer to germinate. So you almost get this catch-up. If you wait a little longer and you germinate when your soil's 50 degrees, those radishes emerge about the same time that your radishes did when you were planting when it was 35 or 40 degrees.
Well, that's all for Great Gardening tonight. You can follow us on our social media channels on Instagram at Great Gardening PBS North and on YouTube at youtube.com/greatgardening, where you can find tonight's episode posted tomorrow. Thanks, Bob and Deb, for your great insights tonight. We'll return for a new episode next week, but until then, from all of us here at Great Gardening, thank you for watching and enjoy the garden.